Hey, what's up guys, it's Apollo Uchiha here, back with a new series. The name of this series is What If Naruto Reunited with His Family. And yeah guys, it's a story by Rixie. And before continuing this, if you haven't, then please do leave a like and subscribe to my channel if you like the content of this channel. And without further ado, let's begin our story. Our story begins 12 years later, the QB attack. Crying. That's the first thing Kushina remembered of her baby, her precious little boy, crying. This wasn't the first time she'd woken up, no. She slipped in and out of consciousness for years, but every single time, the first thing that came to her mind was her baby boy, little Naruto. She wasn't sure how much time had passed in the outside world, but she was certain it had been a long, long time. She wanted to see him so badly. She wanted to hold him in her arms, talk to him, care for him, and love him like only she could. She wanted to be a mother to her son so badly, but what could she do? She'd been in a coma for what seemed like years upon end, and yet things could still get worse. Here she was, trapped in a dark cell. The bare stone floor beneath her was cold, and aside from a thin blanket, some hay in the corner of the room and two buckets in the opposite corner, there were no other comforts, and she used that word very loosely. She hadn't always been here. Before this, she had been in a hospital room for sorts, as her captor did not want her dying, but she'd been waking up much more frequently than before, so with her out of the woods per se, whoever was in charge had apparently decided that she be moved to somewhere less conspicuous and more secure. The first time she woke up, she learned that Shimura Danzo was the one holding her captive. Minato had told her of him and his secret Anbu organization route. She knew he was bad news, and so did her husband. That just never thought he'd do something like this treacherous and treasonous. Kushina, the red head turned. Kneeling next to her was her one and only, the one man she ever loved, and the father of her precious child, her husband Minato Namikaze, the Ondem Hokage of Konohagakure. He had been in a coma with her, in and out of consciousness, much like she was. They didn't always catch each other awake, but that didn't matter, as neither of them remained conscious for very long. Yes, she replied, her weak voice and somewhat raspy from years of little to no use. He put his hand over hers, a deep determination showing behind his blue pools. "I'm sorry," he replied, his voice in similar state to hers. "It's taken so long, but I finally have enough chakra. We're getting out of here." Danzo had kept them weak. He had made sure that they'd never gain enough chakra to fight back and had only given them enough care to keep them barely alive. He underestimated exactly how smart Minato was. The Yellow Flash was no one's prisoner, and he was about to prove just that. "Get ready. We're getting out of here, and then we'll be able to see Naruto again." Minato gave a shaky smile to his wife, who returned it with one of her own. "Link break, and that's our report," Hokage-sama said. Kakashi, he was on Sarutobi, the Sandem Hokage, side. He wondered why nothing was even simple, ever, when his surrogate grandson was involved. No, nothing was ever simple at all. "I see. Thank you, Team 7 is dismissed. Kakashi, could you stay behind? There are some things I would like to discuss further with you." Nodding, Kakashi Harake complied with the Hokage's wishes. Turning to his student, the Jonins told them they were dismissed for the day and that they should go home and rest. Sakura nodded and relieved, a smile appearing on her face. Sasuke gave his usual and Naruto merely shrugged. Kakashi expected the responsive he received from Sasuke and Sakura, but not Naruto. He's been too subdued. He'd been that way ever since leaving Wave. His blonde student looked like he had a ton and a lot on his mind going on, and the Kopinin wasn't sure what was wrong with the boy. The three Genins left the room, closing the door behind them. Usually, this was around the time Sakura would ask Sasuke for a date. He'd refuse, and then Sakura would be asked by Naruto, also refusing. However, only two of the four things occurred today, though. Sakura asked Sasuke out on a date as usual, and got rejected as usual, but when she turned around, expected Naruto to have to deal with him, he merely looked at her briefly, something lost in thought over something before offering her a goodbye and walking away. Sakura stood there, slack-jawed, with wide eyes. Naruto was acting weird. What the hell just happened? She asked herself. Link break. Uzumaki Naruto was a brash and loud boy. He was unrefined and had almost no manners and very little care for them. He didn't mind being this way, mostly because he didn't know there was any other way to be. No one had ever taught him such things. There was no one who could. Scratch that. There was no one who would. The Hokage was a busy man. He wouldn't devote a large amount of time to Naruto, and everyone else besides from Tanoichi and Ayame hated the boy. He was wrong, of course, but he didn't know that. Kakashi was a mystery to him. He honestly didn't know how the man felt about him, since he seemed so indifferent in general. Despite wanting to believe otherwise, he was positive Sakura didn't enjoy his company, and the only thing she did was fawn over this Uchiha. Sasuke himself thought Naruto was below him. Naruto heaved a sigh. Truth to be told, he'd not been feeling too great since his mission in Wave. Sure, they saved the day and all that, but that was exactly why he was feeling down now. In Wave, where nobody knew him or what burden he carried, he was accepted. Hell, he was hailed as a hero, but there, back into his own home, here his own hometown, he couldn't walk down the street without being glared at or ignored altogether. He couldn't buy anything without prices being doubled or sometimes tripled, and he couldn't go to many of the restaurants. Ramen being his favorite food isn't the only reason, it's all his diet consisted of. The contrast between the public reactions he'd received in Wave and what he received here was really getting to him, and he was certainly feeling down. He wasn't sure the mask he created when he was younger, the one that he hid his true persona behind, could last much longer. He wasn't sure he could continue to grin and bear things. He wasn't sure he could continue being the happy knucklehead he was viewed as. He wasn't sure, even he wanted to. And somewhere in that deeper, darker parts of his heart, the part that couldn't be fixed, he wasn't sure he even wanted to remain in Konoha. Heaving another sigh, Naruto trudged on, doing what he could to ignore the villagers around him as he made his way to his apartment. The apartment where he'd spent another day alone. Yet again, link break. So the Kyuubi's chakra has started to manifest itself, said the Hokage, the question more rhetorical than anything. He wasn't sure that he liked what he was hearing. On one hand, if Naruto could harness it correctly, the Kyuubi could be a great asset to the boy as well as the village, but on the other hand, Rosa knew that this could turn out into a disaster. Yes, though he seems in complete control while using it. Maybe a little more brutal and careless, but it's still him. Currently, Hokage-sama, I'm more concerned what he's feeling. He's been fairly reclusive since we left Wave. Kakashi replied. Any of his usual disinterest was gone. Though he acted the part most of the time, it was part of how he coped with his losses. But that didn't mean he didn't care for Naruto. He was happy to have his sensei's son on his team. After seeing his performance in Wave, he was determined to train his team harder. He's almost lost his student, and he was trained so he was going to train them so that didn't happen again. He was so tired of losing people important to him. Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, inhaling from his pipe. Everything Kakashi was telling him was troubling. Naruto was unhappy? That wouldn't do. The Kyuubi could free itself based purely on the child's mental state. Hiruzen frowned, knowing something had to be done to ensure nothing of that sort occurred. Maybe it's time I call for Jiraiya. The boy will certainly be happier if he learns of his godfather, and I'm sure my student would be happy to teach Minato's boy. It also wouldn't be too bad of an idea to have Jiraiya tell him of Kushinato, thought Hiruzen. Even though she had her enemies, there is little consequences if he knew of her. It would also help matter if her name unintentionally happens to slip out at some point. We've already totally hidden her connections to Minato after all. Yes, this will have to do for now. The Hokage leveled his gaze at Kakashi and said, for now, try to bring about a friendship between him and his teammates. I will try to call Jiraiya, and from there The Hokage meant to continue, but a flash of yellow at Kakashi's back stopped him in his tracks. His eyes widened, not believing what was in front of him. Kakashi, having felt a presence, turned around and his visible eye widened much like the Sandem. Sensei? Standing in front of him on shaky leg was the Yondam and his wife, two people who would have been confirmed to have died the night the Kyuubi was sealed. They looked malnourished and thin, but they were certainly alive. We made it. I'm so glad. Minato's eyes closed and he collapsed on the floor. exhausted. Kushina, who was still capable of standing, if only barely, kneeled slowly next to her husband, worry over his condition evident in her eyes. Watching Minato fall had also shaken the Sandam out of his shock and immediately barked orders. Boar, rabbit, seal this room. No one gets in or out unless I say otherwise. Cat, get our best medic nins over here. Now. Tiger, get me Inoichi and Kakashi. The Sandem paused here, looking the Jonin in the eye. Fine, Naruto. With everything you just told me, this could have just happened at a better time. I think it's time he meet his parents. Link break. Shimura Danzo was a man of few words and even less emotions. It was rare that he let any of them show through, even anger, but today it could not be helped. The old Warhawk had underestimated his opponent, and there was no way it wasn't going to come back and bite him in the ass. He stared at the empty cell in fury, wondering how he could have been so careless. His frown deepened as he questioned himself, thinking over what possessed him to not find a better way to prevent Minato's actions. Danzo sighed to himself, deciding that now was not the time to dwell over his mistakes of the past. Kushina and Minato were gone, his plans foiled, and now he would need to flee Konoha. He managed to avoid Hiruzen's eyes until now, but this little indiscretion would undoubtedly send the entirety of Konoha's wrath down upon him. Sigh. Immediately a pale child appeared at Danzo's back, kneeling before him in a show of the utmost respect. He seemed no older than 12, and his voice sounded void, all of emotions. Yes, Danzo-sama. I am leaving the village, but you must stay here, keep an eye on things, especially Uzumaki Naruto. I want reports on how he's doing and what happens in Konoha every so often. Make sure nothing is outdated, but don't become suspicious. That is all. You are dismissed. And with that, Danzo walked into the shadows, intending to never set another foot in Konoha, unless it was a situation that was favorable for his ambitions, like being named as Hokage. Link break. Inoichi was led into the office where he was met with the sight of the Yondaime and his wife. His mouth dropped open and he paused, shocked beyond moments. As a ninja and a head division of interrogation division, there wasn't much that surprised him, but when two people who were certified to be dead 12 years ago suddenly pop up alive in the Hokage's office, you're going to be speechless. What? Inoichi Yamanaka couldn't even get out a proper word out of his mouth. I shall explain later, the Hokage said as he diverted his eyes from the medic nin healing Minato to look at Inoichi. There's not a lot of information we have at this point, but we desperately need to know what happened, Inoichi. Look through their minds and tell me what you see. Start on the day of the Kyuubi attack, then work your way forward till today, and do it as quickly as possible. Inoichi thought still, shocked, knelt next to Kushina and got to work immediately. She smiled at him and nodded her head, understanding what he had to do as a medic nin, tended to her injuries. Nodding back to her, he ran through a series of hand signs before coming to a stop and staring at her. She sent Sanpo no Jutsu. With those words, Inoichi descended into her mind. The both of them remained motionless for nearly 15 minutes before Inoichi blinked, then blinked again, before his face turned stony. He turned to the Sandam with a deep frown on his face. Hokage-sama, this is very bad. The Sandam frowned in response, but ordered Inoichi to speak, and thus the Mindwalker told everyone present exactly what he saw and how grave things were. Link break. Minato had just used the Harashin to transport himself and the Kyuubi deep into the forest from far away Konoha and the villagers. The Sharingan was no longer in the Kyuubi's eyes, but the yellow flash highly doubted that the absence of it would suddenly make the enraged Biju more docile. In fact, it probably made the threat even worse, as the fox now had control over itself and was far better at using its body than the masked Uchiha who had been manipulating it. And double as much as Minato hated to admit it was, he only had one option left. Bravely flashing away, he returned almost instantly with Kushina and their son Kushina. We don't have much time. We have to seal the Kyuubi into Naruto. Kushina's eyes were no, she screamed. There has to be some other way. Our baby boy. We can't do that to him, Minato. He's our son. There isn't time for anything else. And I certainly couldn't ask someone else to let their child bear this burden. But Kushina's eyes welled with tears before she buried her face into her husband's chest, sobbing. Minato tried to stay strong for her, but tears were rolling down his cheeks as well. I'm sorry, Kushina. This is the only option we have left. Summoning an altar and placing Naruto on it, he turned to the Kyuubi as he ran through hand seals. Appearing behind him was an apparition clothed in a pure white kimono. Its face was that of a demon, sharp teeth piercing eyes of the darkest black that instills fear instantly, and horns atop its head. The QB, understanding what Minato intended to do, narrowed its sight and launched forward the attack at him, only to be stopped dead in the tracks. Kushina, though disconnected from the Biju, still had some measure of control. Using her chakra chains, she bonded the QB and prevented him from harming Minato and Naruto. Her husband looked at her, a sad smile on his face as he launched forward. Through the use of the Shikai Fujin, he pulled out half of the QB chakra, sealed it into himself. The QB, dazed out, unrelentingly continued to struggle as Minato turned to his son before speeding through another set of hand seals. Roaring, the QB thrust its massive claw forward, taking advantage of his slip in Kushina's focus. She was tired and so afraid of what her son would have to endure that her attentions drifted from the briefest of moments. Seeing what would happen if they wouldn't intervene, Minato and Kushina, in a desperate attempt to rescue their child, jumped in front of the part of the QB's claw. A single claw tore through Kushina and Minato's body, stopping right before it could simply impale Naruto. Blood trickled down on the Biju's claw, but Kushina and her husband did not care if they were to die, so long as Naruto was safe. Hakai Fuyin. Minato struggled, crimson liquid bubbling over his lips and down his chin, and then the seal activated, dragging the QB into it where it would find itself spending its foreseeable future. Only seconds after the Biju was sealed, the Shinigami who ruled over the Shiki Fujin prepared to take the soul of Minato, but then Shinigami did not count one thing. Kushina, the red-headed, hot-tempted wife of the Yondam Hokage, refused to let such a thing happen to her husband. She wouldn't allow the Shinigami to force Minato into combat with the QB within its belly. Not after the sacrifice they'd already made. If they were going to die, she was going to make damn sure that at least they go down resting in peace. With the last of her strength, her chakra chains materialized and grabbed at Minato's soul, wrapping around it and pulling. Didn't think I'd just let you take his soul, did ya, Tebane? The Shinigami, seeing what a mere mortal was daring him to do, pulled back. The tug of war continued on, but Kushina's strength was equally and quickly draining, and the Shinigami would not be denied. With a vicious tug, it pulled forth Minato's soul, Kushina's chains, and by extension her soul as well. With a swift downward strike, it severed their souls from their bodies and vanished as they dropped lifelessly to the ground, or at least that's what the Shinigami thought. Kushina had not participated in the Shikai Fujin, and so by taking her soul as payment for his summoning, even if it was only for a bit moment, he voided his part of the contract. Though half of the QB remained sealed within Minato, neither he or Kushina would have their souls taken from them as payments. The life drained out of Kushina and Minato as they lay motionlessly in the clearing, their son crying all the while. Then, where there were once only 3 bodies, there were now 7. Standing over the down form of the Yondam Hokage and his wife were Danzo and the 3 of his root operatives. A small sinister smile crept onto Danzo's lips. Before him was an opportunity he could not pass up. Link break. From here, said Inoichi. Danzo operates rushed them to their base. He wanted to take Naruto as well, but after setting up suitable Fuax corpses of Minato and Kushina, he could already hear you closing in. Seeing as how Naruto would not stop crying, he saw him as a flight risk and left him where he was. Once at his base, his operatives did everything within their power to tend to Minato and Kushina's injuries to make sure they pulled through. It was touch and go. But thanks to Kushina Uzumaki's genes and Minato's new status as a Jinchuriki, they made it through. This was the point where Kushina passed out, and she stayed that way for quite a while. She woke up years later based on a conversation she had with Danzo. She'd been in a coma, and he told her that the minute she and Minato were out of the woods and awake, he would give and begin turning them into his perfect weapons. After that, the 2 of them were conscious very infrequently over the next 12 years. This is the first time they'd managed to stay awake for so long. The Hokage was furious. His fist clenched around his pipe, and within seconds it snapped in half. He had been lenient with his old teammate. He tried to get him to shut down Root without having to resort to violence, but now the man had gone too far. Sarutobi Hiruzen would have Danzo's head. He swore his very life on it. "Find Danzo," he said to the Anbu who brought him to Inoichi. "Take any reinforcement you think you need, and once you locate him, alert me immediately. Danzo has severely overstepped his boundaries, and by the end of the day, I will end his life. Go!" The Anbu complied immediately. In Konoha, there was one thing that was absolute: no one crosses the Hokage. And Danzo was going to pay for that now. As this is where I'm going to be leaving this part of, guys. I hope you like this one, and if you do, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I know it's a short one, and I'm thinking of shortening the parts and, well, making a short series of my own. So what do you think? Should I start series of my own as well and make them maybe 4 to 8 parts and short variants like these, like 20 minutes or so? Comment down below, and yeah, if you have any suggestions on what should I write first, that as well. This is Apollo Uchiha, and I'm signing out. Till then, peace.